Today is two different Sundays, maybe three. It's the last Sunday after Pentecost, so it's included in the normal time of the season after, which is season after Epiphany, season after Pentecost. Every time you see green, it's normal time. But traditionally, this last Sunday after Pentecost is dedicated to Christ the King. It's known as Christ the King Sunday, and you may have noticed the lessons are all geared toward that image of Christ as King, which is not my favorite image. It arises, of course, out of the messianic promise of a son of David, a new king coming. And it made sense in societies such as medieval and post-Renaissance societies in Europe, where they had kings, and kings stood in authority and stood for order. So, in a sense, what the church was saying, what the scripture was saying is, have Christ as your king. Not really in a subversive way, but almost. Same was true with the Jews, for whom God was king. That's why on Good Friday, the shout from the crowd, "We have no king but Caesar," is such a shock. But the image of a king is not one that we resonate with. It's not how we are governed. We are not subjects. We are not under the protection of some powerful person. We, in fact, in our country, felt that presence of kingly power and order and direction to be oppressive. Which brings us to the third theme of this Sunday, which is Thanksgiving. The Christians, the Puritans, and Pilgrims who came to this country, their Anglicans went to Virginia, but many of them were coming away from the Church of England, away from the king as the head of the church. And as foolish as that may have been, it is our heritage and makes a lot of sense. Calls forth in us a responsibility that is not shared by those who are subject to the whims of someone else's power. And it's an important Christian principle as well, that we are participants with Christ in this work of redemption of the world. We are not simply passive objects for God's direction, but willing and thoughtful and caring co-beings with Christ. At some point, this has been one of my pet peeves, especially this year. I've wanted to go through the prayer book and look at how many references there are to kingship and lordship and might and power and authority. And the British under Henry VIII and Elizabeth I may have liked that, but I'm not sure we need that right now. But I like Thanksgiving. It's a time to be aware of our blessings, our gratitude, beyond all the things that are associated with Thanksgiving dinner and the commercialization of it. That idea of Thanksgiving is core in Christian faith, in our response to the wonderful gifts that we have been given. And I hope you have that sense of gifts and will later come and, I hope, remember those blessings and gifts. But Christians extend the spirituality of Thanksgiving beyond simply our blessings. We call the ritual that we enter into each Sunday the Holy Eucharist, and the word Eucharist in Greek means thanksgiving. So, as a Eucharistic people, Thanksgiving is at the center of our piety, our spirituality, our life, and it's Thanksgiving not only for those things which we are happy we have, because all creation is from God. I was sort of binge watching Anthony Bourdain this last couple of weeks because everyone else was on TV, was on vacation. I guess Anthony Bourdain is too, but there was the Indonesia episode, and they had a special discussion of the Indonesian shadow play. They have those figures on sticks that they have a candle behind and a sheet in front and play out the mythological themes. And the person that was the master at shadow play was talking about the philosophy of it, and that originally there's darkness, unconscious. And then with human creation or evolution or whatever, there's the light of consciousness dawns in the world. And there is light. But he pointed out that wherever there is light, you will also find shadow. That the light and the shadow go together. And you can't get away from it. It's like heads and tails of a coin. And the good things and the bad things in our life somehow go together. And we cannot and must not, and spiritually, really, it's impossible to say, okay, I just want the good stuff in my life. I don't want the bad. That's what I want to ask you about, okay? Just the blessings, just the good. Just the turkey. No Brussels sprouts. That's good. But it's impossible, because wherever there's light, there's shadow. And it's really when we try to separate it and demand only light, demand only the perfect brightness, the shadow gets darker and darker and darker. That's when it becomes evil. That's when it gains mastery over it. When we reject it and think it's not there, because it's always there. If we think we're only light and we only want the light, the shadow's going to come up from behind. So in our spiritual practice, we need to be thankful not only for the light, but also for the shadow. Not only for the good things in life, but also for those things which seem to us to be bad things in life, because all creation comes from God. And it's in the intermixing of these two that life and truth, as Jesus said, emerge. So we need to find our way to thanksgiving, to gratitude for everything. And I've talked about that process before. And it begins with a kind of radical acceptance. We have to accept the world the way it is. We have to be open to reality the way it is. We have to be open to ourselves the way we are. When we pretend things are otherwise, we get in trouble because we're working with a delusion. When we go to God and with a false front, or try to enter relationships pretending to be someone else, if we're really good at it, we may elicit love, but it'll be love for someone else. It won't be for us. If we lie to God, and mostly only by lying to ourselves, our false front will be walking into heaven, and we're going to say, but we have to accept what we're given and not paper it over. And we do that all the time. We spend most of our time making up stories about things where we come out right and everybody else comes out wrong, or sometimes where we always come out wrong and everybody else is right. It's not the way it is. Our consciousness separates us to a certain extent. It did precipitate the fall from Eden, from that undifferentiated oneness. But it also allows us to look at things truly, to see the world for what it is, and other people and ourselves. And we have to just start with that acceptance. Acceptance is not the same as approval. I'm not asking you to think that it's okay for people to hit their children, or for people to steal or murder, or to have grossly more stuff than the poor. But it's the way it is, and that's the world that God has presented to us, and it's the one we need to help craft into a life. And following acceptance, there has to be forgiveness. I have a different take on forgiveness. In the end, if you're thinking about sin and fault and that, maybe it's up to God to forgive, and we aren't capable of it. But even for God, I see forgiveness in the same way that I look at judgment when I think about, say, a last judgment after your life is over or something. For me, it's not, okay, this was good, this was bad, you're totally bad, so you can't have whatever. It's in the gospel, I guess. But what I see forgiveness, judgment, forgiveness as is not saying, oh, that's okay, or let's forget about it and erase it. But rather, how does that fit into the story of your life, or the story of the world? Forgiveness to me is God showing me how even those things that make me cringe somehow make sense in creation. For me, that's forgiveness. That's a step beyond acceptance. And I think once that's true, then you cultivate gratitude. Not only do you accept, not only do you forgive life and others and whatever, God, for being what they are, forgive yourself most of all, but you become thankful for it because you understand how it all in some way or another is a blessing. It all is part of creation. It's all a gift. One of my favorite sayings is from Brother David Stendhal Rost, who says, there's limited, if any, control that we have over life, that most of life is in fact given, and if life is given, then treat it as a gift. But I realized, this is kind of a repeat from things I've said before, but I realized when I was working on this sermon this week that you don't have to just start out at acceptance. That in fact, acceptance is the final stage of what's been talked about and taught about for 40, 50 years as the stages of grief. That when something bad happens, we tend to say, oh no. We won't fit that into our story of life. I won't accept that person's death. I won't accept that disability. I won't accept that diagnosis. I won't accept that rebuff or loss. But that working through that, not denying our denial, but accepting our denial, we move on to anger. Once you notice the stuff that's coming down on you, and it's true for me too, you can get pretty angry. It's not fair, it's not justified. And that's a human emotion. It maybe arises from fear, but it's a pretty quick transition from fear to anger, I find. In those stages of grief, following anger comes bargaining. You kind of dissipate your anger. It's not going anywhere. It's to be hoped that you won't act out so much on your anger, but because that can be devastating and hard in itself. But working through anger and exhausting it sometimes, you get to bargaining. You say, okay, well, maybe if I do this, this, and this, that'll change, or I can undo it, or make that person like me again, or it'll be different this next time, or whatever it is. You start to bargain. You bargain with other people, you bargain with God, you bargain with yourself. And usually that doesn't change reality, because you don't have the power to change reality, even bad reality, unpleasant reality. And so you sink into a kind of depression. That's at least how Kubler-Ross talked about the stages of dying and the stages of grief, and it's proven over time to be a fairly effective way of understanding. And that depression can come, and I understand depression. It's not sadness so much, it's a lethargy and a sense of futility and a darkness to things. But if you work through depression, and again, all these things you have to work through, and usually it's better with some help. Following depression comes to acceptance again. And that's when you pick up these other things: acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, thanksgiving. That's a good spiritual process. That's a note you can make for 2019 to think about. Beyond that work is love. And all this comes by grace. The stages come by grace, including denial, including anger, including depression. Acceptance, forgiveness, thanksgiving, the ability to do that comes by grace. Response to grace. But mostly love comes by grace. God loves you. This world is a place that's designed just to manifest, incarnate, and celebrate that love. That's the gospel. That's the good news. God so loved the world that he gave his only Son, the Word, the King, the Alpha and Omega, who was and is to come, his only Son, so that all who walk in his way of faith will know eternal life. Thanks be to God.